This is Classical Gas, a podcast series produced by Classical Voice North America. I'm Gail Wein. Stephen Hough is a concert pianist, a published author, and an accomplished composer. His work for piano and string quartet, Noces Rouge, will have its first West Coast performance at the Music at Menlo Festival in California in July 2026. It's inspired by a book by the American author Willa Cather called My Antonia.
She's one of my favorite novelists, and I've read My Antonia at least twice, maybe three times. It's a story, of course, of the pioneers in Nebraska, coming from mainly Bohemia in Central Europe, and it's just a wonderful novel. I recommend it to anyone who hasn't actually read it.
Hough explains that in the book, there is a story within a story that really caught his imagination.
There's this little sort of vignette of these two Russian brothers who seem rather dour and bad-tempered and don't really want to get on with anyone. And they wonder, why are they here? They come all the way from Russia to the middle of Nebraska. And it turns out that they did something terrible back home. There was a wedding in the village in the middle of the steppes of Russia. And everyone got very drunk at the party. And these brothers offered a lift to the bride and groom back to their village. But it was the middle of the wolving season, so they get in their sled and they're riding along and they get stuck in the snow and everyone's drunk and carousing. And anyway, the wolves get close and they realize the only way to get this sled moving again was to throw out the bride. And when the groom objected, he got thrown out as well. So the brothers made it back to their village. And it was morning and the monastery bells were ringing and someone found out somehow about this and they were in disgrace and they were chased basically from village to village in disgrace and they ended up in Nebraska. So that's the story. And I thought when I first read this, what a marvelous tone poem this would make.
Hough's piece was originally commissioned by David Finkel and Wu Han for Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. The two are the artistic directors of both the Chamber Music Society and of the Music at Menlo Festival in California. When she first heard it, Wu Han said it was not what she imagined the music would be.
I was expecting something, very sophisticated. But when I first heard it, I was like, this is the wildest thing I ever heard in my whole life. My first reaction is that, oh my God, I got to get the music. I have to learn this one.
And he presents himself as a modicum of conservatism in every way. Yet inside this conservative exterior is one of the wildest people I have ever encountered in my life. And it comes out, of course, in his piano playing. And the piece actually is just as wild as he is. It's very strong because it's based on a very compelling and dramatic piece of literature that ties the whole thing together. But the way Stephen illustrates the action with this piece is absolutely, it's riveting, it's shocking, it's just not what you expect.
I could see that there would be three movements from this tale. One would be the wedding itself and the love between the bride and groom. The second would be the party where everyone gets drunk. And then the third would be the ride in the snow when all the tragedy and horror happens. So we begin in church. I take a traditional Russian wedding hymn, and that happens in a very plain sort of form, and then it becomes the love music of this couple. So it becomes a sort of romantic thing, and it becomes more and more passionate and so on, using that material. Then the second movement, I found two Russian drinking songs also used at weddings, and those form the basis for the second movement, this kind of raucous one where everything's out of tune. And then there's a sort of second beautiful, rather melancholy Russian hymn, which becomes, I guess, when everyone's fallen down drunk or something, but it's kind of a dream world. And then we get into the last movement, and that's just my own material, but we hear bits of the wedding and bits of the party coming back. That's basically it, Gail, the external musical ideas behind the piece.
Yeah.
And it's quite a crazy piece. There's a lot of real virtuoso writing. And I'm so delighted that the quartet, which was at the premiere, the Viano Quartet, will be joining us in Menlo for this performance.
Well, you touched on a lot of things I was going to ask about. I'm wondering, did you write it specifically for the Viano Quartet and you?
No, I just wrote it for me and whatever quartet came along. And then I wasn't prepared for how good they were. I mean, they just absolutely tore into this piece. They ate it up. They just owned it. And I was thrilled from the very first rehearsal. So when all this fitted together, I was very, very excited.
So when I read the story, I found it very operatic. So your thought about a tone poem, my mind was taking it one step further. This could be a one-act opera.
I would love to do a Willa Cather opera. I think many of her novels would work this way. There's a problem, though, is that I think maybe this is expired now, but she left instructions that none of her works could be filmed or made into anything after her death. She has such clarity of language, of structure. There's such clean writing, and that I think she would lend herself beautifully to being adapted into a good, tasteful film or opera.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think the way you approach this instrumental work is really in a very operatic way. Each episode seems to be clearly delineated and very colorful. I'm curious, in Gramophone, you wrote that the inspiration of literature for composition could follow either a precise path or simply evoke a mood. And you said that this work is somewhere in between the two. Can you talk about your approach within that context?
Yeah, well, something like Don Quixote of Strauss, he literally has something to show you every little motion and every moment of the story that he's trying to tell. So I didn't want to be bound by that. And because of using this material, the church hymn, the drinking songs that are traditional, it's inescapable that it has a more direct connection with the story. So, but on the other hand, I didn't want to feel, what does this represent or that, is that chords this? It isn't. It's just once we go on the journey of listening to the piece, we don't need to know the story really so much. But I think it helps to know the story. I'm a great believer in abstract music, and I think music doesn't need to speak. It's one of the great joys. It transcends opinions and politics and religion and everything else. We can actually enjoy music outside of all of those categories. Still, I think it's actually nice to know some background.
I've listened to your piece several times to the live recording from Tippett Rise, and every time I hear it, I catch on the movement where the violin seems to be tuning, and the band seems to be tuning just before the second section. Tell me about this choice and what inspired you to throw that in.
It's a bit of a joke, really, in a way, because it's a very dark story and we're about to embark on a very dark part of it. But I just was thinking of this being the village band, and the violinists playing slightly out of tune or rough. And in fact, I do want the players to be a bit gutsy with this, not completely clean. And then I thought, well, they're probably going to tune up before. So it was a way to break the mood between the wedding movement and, well, in fact, the love music that winds down and presumably, the honeymoon feeling of this and they're lying in each other's arms. And it's a kind of rude awakening. And I thought if I went straight into the band, this is the little segue when you're shifting scenery from one thing to another. So I just thought it would be something. And in fact, I've not written out exactly how they would tune.
So the title, Les Noces Rouge, means wedding in blood. Why did you choose a French title for this work?
Well, there's a couple of puns in here, actually. There's The Red Wedding, which is an episode of Game of Thrones, which I've not watched, but my partner said, you should call it that because, it's sort of. And I said, well, what's the Red Wedding? And he's, well, it's the Game of Thrones. And everyone knows it, apparently. It's a very famous episode where everyone gets killed at this wedding. So I thought that was kind of fun. And then I liked the pun of Les Noces, which is the Stravinsky Russian wedding, the great work for two pianos and chorus. So I just thought, well, the Red Wedding, Les Noces, let's call it Les Noces Rouge. That I kind of combine the two puns together. I like having subtitles. I think almost all of my serious pieces, my 4 piano sonatas, my cello sonata, they all have, in fact, my piano concerto, they all have subtitles. And often in different languages. I think the 4 piano sonatas is actually in 4 different languages. We've got Broken Branches, the Notturno Luminoso, which is Italian, and then Trinitas, which is Latin, and then Vida Breve, which is Spanish, the 4th sonata. So this is a French title. So maybe I just put it in there so it's something for you to ask me when we do an interview like this.
I love that. So, many people only know you as a pianist and perhaps as an author, but your composition catalog goes back over 20 years. And the first time I became aware of you as a composer was when you wrote the fanfare toccata for the Clyburn competition in 2022. And I was so impressed and so knocked out by what a great piece it was and what different spins each pianist put on it because they each had to play, all the competitors had to play that piece. Um, your composition catalog goes back over 20 years. How did you get interested in composing, and how does that affect your approach to performing?
Well, I composed a lot from the very earliest years of playing the piano. I would say that the same year that I learned to read music, I was writing music as well. But basically, I couldn't study composition when I went to Juilliard. It wasn't an option to study piano and compositions. It was a time, really, when I think people thought that you were either a composer or you were something else. The idea you'd be both seemed like you were trying to be too clever. But when you go back in history, all pianists composed. And really, the end of that road was probably Bartók and Shostakovich, because they were both brilliant pianists and wrote music for themselves to play. So, yeah, it's been a very important part of my life. And the other part of your question, I would say it's just part of my musical soul, really. So I don't think it's impossible, of course, not to be able to play music if you don't write it yourself. But I think you do think about music in a different way. And I think now a lot more pianists are writing their own music. If you can read music, you can write music in the same way as if you can read words, you can write words. I think all people should have a go.
That's fascinating. I tried my hand at composing. I'm not a performing musician at this point, but I took a composition class for, well, people like me, and I found the process of putting notes to paper and coming up with a concept and forming things. It kind of changed my life. Just that one exercise to really understand what composers are doing in a small way when they're writing their work that people will eventually perform and hear. So it was incredibly revealing and also weirdly incredibly scary.
It is, well, you're really revealing something of your soul. And this, when I began doing it again, I was very scared about playing my own music in public because I felt, if people don't like a concert that you gave playing other people's music, that's one thing. It's an opinion amongst others. But if they don't like the music you've written, it feels very personal. And I think it's probably good for our mental health on the one hand, although on the other hand, maybe it can send us crazy too.
Um, it's your first time performing at Music at Menlo at the festival. What are you looking forward to about the experience?
Well, it's a wonderful festival and fantastic colleagues. and I love California. So this is a new experience for me in a country where I've had many experiences. So I can't wait. And I love Wuhan and David. They're an absolute power couple, power team, doing everything that's important for classical music in our present times. So it'll be great to hang out with them for a bit.
Yeah. Well, Sir Stephen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me.
My pleasure, Gail. See you in person sometime, I hope.
Stephen Hough's piano quintet Les Noces Rouge will be performed by the Piano Quartet with the composer at the piano on July 26th and 28th, 2026 at Music at Menlo. This is Classical Gas. I'm Gail Wein, producer and host of this podcast series. Thanks for listening.